Hello and welcome to Indus News. Live from Islamabad, I'm Naila Shuja, and these are the headlines. The global number of coronavirus cases has crossed 100 million, while the death toll has reached over 2.15 million. The worst-hit country, United States, accounts for over a quarter of the global infections, with over 25.4 million cases. India has the world's largest second caseload with over 10.6 million infections, followed by Brazil's more than 8.9 million cases. Pakistan has registered over 1,500 new cases and 74 deaths overnight, with the toll crossing 11,400. In India, police have registered 22 cases against the protesting farmers, accusing them of violence on Republic Day. However, a union leader says government associates instigated the violence to discredit the farmers' movement. Meanwhile, in New York, the Sikh community gathered outside the Indian embassy in solidarity with the protesting farmers. Russia and the United States have struck a deal to extend the New START nuclear arms control treaty. The Kremlin said President Vladimir Putin and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden discussed the issue over a phone call. White House says Biden also raised the issue of Moscow's alleged meddling in U.S. election and massive cyber espionage campaign. A UN report has found the Yemeni government and the Houthi rebels guilty of money laundering and corruption. The annual report to the UN Security Council on the implementation of sanctions says that the malpractice adversely affected access to adequate food supplies. It said the Houthis also collected at least $1.8 billion as state revenue in 2019 to help fund its war effort. And in cricket, Pakistan are batting in the first innings on the second day of the first Test match against South Africa at Karachi's National Stadium. The Stumps on day one, the hosts trailed the visitors by 187 runs while losing 4 wickets after bowling out South Africa for 220 runs. The two sides will play the 2-match Test series and 3 T20 internationals. For more news and details, stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back. The global number of new coronavirus cases has crossed 100 million, while the death toll exceeds 2.15 million. The worst-hit country, United States, accounts for over a quarter of the global infections, with over 25.4 million cases. India has the world's second highest caseload, with over 10.6 million infections, followed by Brazil's more than 8.9 million cases. More on the coronavirus in this report. As the world crossed the 100 million COVID-19 cases, the leaders of even the most developed countries have nothing to offer but half-baked apologies over the mishandling and faltering social-political infrastructures. In Europe, Portugal's government is considering the transfer of COVID-19 patients abroad as oxygen supply system of a large hospital near Lisbon failed from overuse. AstraZeneca's chief executive says the United Kingdom comes first for vaccines as he rejected calls to divert the doses to the European Union. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has urged the EU to not restrict the vaccine supply. As the United Kingdom's death toll exceeded 100,000 mark, Johnson said he takes full responsibility for what unfolded in Britain's fight against the virus.
As Prime Minister, I take full responsibility for everything that the government has done. What I can tell you is that we truly did everything we could and continue to do everything that we can to minimise loss of life and to minimise suffering in what has been a very, very difficult stage and a very, very difficult crisis for our country, and we will continue to do that, just as every government that is affected by this crisis around the world is continuing to do the same.
Japan's Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga has apologized for an inadequate medical response to COVID-19 patients due to the country's strained health system. Over in the Americas, tribes leaders in the Amazon rainforest have urged the Brazilian government to ensure vaccine rollouts reach all of its communities. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden says the country's vaccine program is in worse shape than anticipated, as he announced to purchase 200 million more doses.
After review of the current vaccine supply and manufacturing plans, I can announce that we will increase overall weekly vaccination distributions to states, tribes, and territories from 8.6 million doses to a minimum of 10 million doses. Starting next week, that's an increase of 1.4 million doses per week.
Public frustration and anger against COVID-19 restrictions continue to grow across the world as economic strife intensifies. Though Dutch cities witnessed relative calm after 3 days of anti-lockdown riots, over in Lisbon, hundreds of protesters clashed with soldiers as they said nationwide lockdown is increasing their poverty. Pakistan has recorded another 74 deaths from COVID-19 overnight. This pushes the toll to 11,450. Health officials say 1,563 infections were detected in the last 24 hours. The tally of cases has risen over 537,000, while more than 492,000 people have recovered. There are more than 33,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country, while over 2,600 are hospitalized currently. In India, police have registered 22 cases against the protesting farmers, accusing them of violence on Republic Day. However, a union leader says government associates instigated the violence to discredit the farmers' movement. More in this report.
3 contentious bills that will change the way India's farmers do business have sparked months of protests across the country. Growers are angry at what they see as laws that help large private buyers at the expense of producers. But the demonstrations have also spilled globally. The Sikh community in New York gathered outside the Indian embassy in solidarity with the protesting farmers.
India is doing this especially in Kashmiri and farmer. They are attacking them, they are killing them, they are innocent.
Around half of India's population works in agriculture. Unrest among the estimated 150 million land-owning farmers represents one of the biggest challenges to the authority of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi since he came to power in 2014. The government's offer to delay the farm laws for 18 months has been rejected by farm leaders who want a total repeal of the laws.
All the bills are for the farmers, and what we want is to take it back. There's hundreds of thousands of people that are in today's rally that are protesting to get back what we want. We want the MST to drop how it was before. We want the Mandi system to come back as well. And here we are in front of the Indian embassy to have the same thing, what we want from India. We want our rights.
The protesters say they want to challenge India, who has carried out the genocide of Sikhs and enacted farm bills carrying out the genocide of Sikhs.
Russia and the United States have struck a deal to extend the New START nuclear arms control treaty. The Kremlin said President Vladimir Putin and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden discussed the issue over a phone call. In a statement, it said the two leaders expressed satisfaction over the exchange of diplomatic notes between their countries. The Kremlin added the procedures required for the extension of the treaty will be completed in the next coming days. Meanwhile, the White House said the two sides agreed to discuss a range of arms control and emerging security issues. It said Biden also raised the issue of Moscow's alleged meddling in the U.S. election and massive cyber espionage campaign. A U.S. federal judge has temporarily blocked President Joe Biden's 100-day freeze on migrant deportations. The decision has once again put the future of thousands of immigrants from across the world, especially in South America, in limbo. The Texas judge's temporary restraining order blocks the policy for 14 days nationwide. Earlier, the state of Texas filed a complaint saying it would face irreparable harm if the deportation freeze took effect. The Biden administration is expected to appeal the ruling. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden has signed an executive order aimed at promoting racial equality. The order scales back the government's use of private prisons and bolsters anti-discrimination enforcement in the housing market. Talking to reporters, Biden stressed the need to open the promise of America to every American.
I believe this nation and this government need to change their whole approach to the issue of racial equity. Yes, we need criminal justice reform, but that isn't nearly enough. We need to open the promise of America to every American, and that means we need to make the issue of racial equity not just an issue for any one department of government. It has to be the business of the whole of government.
Elsewhere, the U.S. State Department said Biden administration will also thoroughly review U.S. sanctions on the International Criminal Court officials. The United States Senate has blocked an attempt to halt former President Donald Trump's impeachment trial, but a conviction now looks unlikely as only 5 Republicans joined the Democrats in rejecting the motion. Republican Senator Rand Paul forced a vote on whether the trial is unconstitutional because Trump is no longer president. Paul presented the point of order after lawmakers were sworn in as jurors for the trial proceedings. The Democratic-led Senate blocked the motion in a 55-45 vote. Talking to the media, Kentucky Senator Paul said the votes meant that the impeachment trial was dead on arrival. Democrats require the support of 17 Republicans to convict Trump on the charge of incitement of insurrection. Acting U.S. envoy to the United Nations, Richard Mills, says that the new administration supports a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The envoy says that the U.S. intends to restore aid for Palestine and reopen its diplomatic office in Washington. In his first speech at the Security Council, Mills said that normalizing ties with Israel is not a substitute for the Israeli-Palestinian peace. He said sustainable progress must be based on active consultation with both sides. This marks the new administration's first official confirmation on its Israel-Palestinian policy since President Joe Biden took office. Previous administration's Middle East policy was warmly received by Tel Aviv, but it was staunchly rebuffed by Ramallah. A United Nations report has found the Yemeni government and the Houthi rebels guilty of money laundering and corruption. The annual report to the UN Security Council on the implementation of sanctions says the malpractice adversely affected access to food supplies. The report says that the Houthis also collected at least $1.8 billion as state revenue in 2019 to help fund its war efforts. It adds Saudi Arabia deposited $2 billion with Yemen's central bank in 2018 under a development program. However, it says the bank laundered a substantial part of the deposited in a sophisticated money laundering scheme. The United Nations has recently warned that Yemen is on the verge of a large-scale famine with millions of civilians at risk. Pakistan has reaffirmed its commitment to the multilateral cooperation for preserving peace and realizing the Sustainable Development Goals. Speaking at a virtual conference in the UN Secretary-General Peace Building Fund, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Pakistan takes pride in its rich UN peacekeeping history. The foreign minister announced a token contribution of $25,000 to the Secretary-General's Peace Building Fund. He said that the pledge underscores Pakistan's long-standing political, human, and financial commitment to UN endeavors in peacekeeping. Later, talking to the media in Islamabad, Qureshi rejected any possibility of bilateral trade with India. Co-chair of Syria peace talks has warned if concrete results of the dialogue are not obtained in a short time, the process will falter. Speaking at the end of the second day of the talks in Geneva, Hadi al-Bahara said participants should not put obstacles in the progress of the dialogue. Without naming anyone, he said the most important feature of the talks is the attitude of all the parties to the constitutional process. Al-Bahara said delegates should show willingness for the full implementation of UN Security Council resolution for the talks to succeed. The 5-day Syrian Constitutional Committee talks are convened by the UN to form the basic principles for the Syrian constitution. It's now time for a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Tunisia's parliament has approved the cabinet reshuffle amid violent protests. Tunisia's Prime Minister Hichem Michichi named 11 new ministers, saying he hopes it will inject new blood into his government. He said the young people protesting outside the parliament reminds the administration to keep its priorities straight. The Prime Minister said the protests are legitimate and the government will listen to the angry youth. However, President Kais Saied indicated he would reject the reshuffle. He also condemned the absence of women among the new ministers. Meanwhile, the riot police opened water cannon on the protesters outside the parliament who rallied against social inequality and police abuse. The African Union has urged Kenya and Somalia to exercise restraint and de-escalate tensions along their borders. Union's head Musa Faki Mahmud says that peace on the Kenya-Somalia border is essential for regional stability. In a statement, Mahmoud said that the neighbors should engage in dialogue to resolve key issues. This comes after Mogadishu accused Nairobi of supporting fighters who clashed with Somali forces on Monday, resulting in 11 deaths. The Ministry of Information said Kenya-backed bandits were attempting to smuggle weapons into Somalia through the porous border. But Kenya distanced itself from the allegations and said it wants the conflict to end. Mali has officially disbanded its military junta according to a government decree. This comes over 5 months after the army deposed President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. The junta briefly governed the country after the August 18 coup. The military has retained a tight grip on the interim government. Coup leader Colonel Islimi Gouta is the interim vice president. The caretaker government is meant to rule for 18 months before staging elections. The European Union says it will regulate the big tech companies and vaccine procedures. The EU Commission President says that the action will be taken following the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. At the World Economic Forum, Ursula von der Leyen said that the bloc will act in 3 main areas in coming years. She said that these will include ensuring vaccine supplies, regulating social media platforms, and enhancing climate neutrality. Von der Leyen pointed to the storming of Capitol Hill as an example of the darker sides of the digital world. The EU executive also welcomed U.S. President Joe Biden's decision to rejoin the Paris Agreement. She urged the new administration in Washington to work with Brussels on the regulation of tech giants such as Google and Facebook. Women are defying gender-related social barriers across the world, and in Afghanistan, the country's first female breaker has set her sights on the Paris Olympics in 2024. More in this report.
At a gym in downtown Kabul, Manisha Talash and her teammates jump and sway to the beat, working up a sweat, breakdancing and doing head spins. When she first joined the breakdancing club about 2.5 months ago, there were no girls there. Now 5 other girls have followed her lead.
This is a new and different profession, and the club did not have a female member when I first joined. I was very interested in breakdancing, and when I became aware that it has come to Afghanistan and its members are all nice people from my own country, I joined this club to introduce this profession to other people. In general, I want to be different.
The club, founded by a few local breakers a year ago, now has over 30 members. They train 3 days a week to learn the finer points of a dance style that has evolved into a sport, hoping one day to compete in the Olympics. Apart from having to overcome social hurdles, Talash has to brace for tough physical training, but she is determined.
This is very tough, and you have to have a strong physique to learn and do it. For example, standing on one hand and holding the whole body weight on it is not easy. But nothing is easy. You can learn and achieve the goal.
Breakdancing, an art form which was born on the streets of New York City in the 1970s, was among 4 sports, along with skateboarding, sports climbing and surfing, that the International Olympic Committee agreed recently to add to the Paris Games in 2024 to attract a younger, more urban audience.
With France under COVID-19 restrictions, Paris Haute Couture Week has not been in its usual form. Many labels have turned to online video presentations since runway shows with fashion crowd congregation is not a possibility. More in this report.
French fashion designer Julia Fournier first learned to wield a pair of scissors, then to design a dress on an iPad. Now the pandemic has forced him to pick up a new skill as movie director. Paris Haute Couture Week is normally a rite of catwalk shows, usually packed with editors, buyers and influencers. But not this year. Fournier spent 3 days shooting a 9-minute and 30 seconds film in his workshop. Pandemic has not just made designers reinvent. Fournier says customers also now want less extravagant designs.
Non, il y a toujours des fêtes.
There are still parties, some weddings, but it all becomes more private, more contained with all the social distancing that we know. So these women also want clothes more high quality, more haute couture, so they also reinvent their way to show off. They ask for dresses less shiny, less extravagant, dresses that they can show in a little group.
The French fashion house Channel shows an intimate family-like atmosphere for its Spring-Summer 2021 show. Models strutted under flower arches at a socially distant presentation with a few famous faces. Actresses, including Penelope Cruz, Marion Cotillard and Lily Rose Depp, all Channel ambassadors, watched from spaced-out chairs as models walked down the steps of Paris Grand Palais onto a catwalk filled with petals and fairy lights. Floral patterns adorned designer Virginie Vaillard's creations embroidered on lace tops or stitched onto dresses. Models also wore floral crowns on their heads. The show closed with a traditional Channel bride arriving on a horse and dressed in a 1920s-style long-buttoned satin dress before Vaillard waved to the socially distant audience.
Russia's Hover Surf company has presented a newly developed model of flying taxi. The company said that the flying vehicle is expected to enter mass production by the end of the year. More about the flying taxi in this report.
Flying cars have been around for a long time in our dreams, but now a Russian company, Hover Surf, has presented the new model of a flying taxi. It said the aircraft will be tested with the use of 5G network in September this year. The same model has already successfully passed a number of tests in Russia and the UAE. The company said it is working to ensure the possibility of flights in Moscow during 2023 to 2025.
The flying machine, the prototype, will soon turn into a serial device that we are going to build in 2021. And thus, all the technologies that we have already built will be applied to this machine. And the car will fly with a new type of engine that is installed here.
In 2017, Hover Surf made a deal with the Dubai police, giving it its first production copy of the Hoverbike S3, a single-seat personal drone. CEO Alexander Atmanov described the hoverbike as an extreme model, but said they have been working on improving the aircraft.
We started with the technology of a single-seat personal drone hoverbike, Scorpion S3. It was extreme. He was noisier, more extreme, bolder, if I may say so. Since then, we have been constantly modernizing the technology of transporting a person by air using a drone, constantly striving for some new goals, and all these technologies are moving from one type of aircraft to another, constantly improving and becoming safer.
The estimated price for a flight by air taxi in the future will be $0.27 per kilometer. Since 2016, the company has attracted $3 million in investments for its flying passenger drone.
Stocks in the Asia-Pacific are trading mixed as investors analyze the latest growth forecast issued by the International Monetary Fund. Australia ASX 200 is leading the losses, sliding over 0.5%, while Seoul's Kospi has also lost close to 0.5%. Stocks in mainland China have also dipped under the flat line fractionally, but Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index and Japan's Nikkei 225 had edged up marginally. It's now time to take a look at the weather around the world. For the latest news updates, you can follow us on our social media at Indus.News.